Good afternoon, everybody.
2 minutes early.
2 minutes early. I'm
Yeah.
2 minutes early.
Yes, you are. 2 minutes early. That's why nobody's moving. Just letting you know.
That's all right.
But take that money for, you gonna ask about it?
I might. Depends on what kind of mood I'm in today. I know you're spicy, but
So good afternoon, everybody. If you could all take your seats. Commissioner Dykes, you're up first. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing to be up first. I'm just saying.
We'll say it's a good thing.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I know we have a lot to cover in a short period of time, so I'll just say I'm Katie Dykes, the commissioner at the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. We've submitted written testimony and we're pleased to take any questions the committee may have.
So I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of questions relative to your agency, which is very large, as some of us know. Oh, good. I should wait until the recording
Yeah.
starts.
We're gonna get yelled at.
Sorry, Madam Administrator. She's listening to me on the other side of the wall.
Yeah, he's like.
So, one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about was, the passport to parks. And so, last year, we put 15, come on up, Mason. We put 15 maintainers in passport to parks. And we did that because we knew that you needed, more staffing in the parks because, you know, someone has to be going around to the parks, checking on things, making sure they're all set, making sure that trash has been picked up and just everything in general having to do with the parks. And all of that is funded out of the passport program. So what you may not be aware of was Representative Walker and I had removed the fringe, from the total fringe from the passport program, just like we have for resident troopers and a number of other things relative to fringe. And we did that because we knew we were reaching a point where there was going to have to be more funding relative to the passport program. In part because the number of staff that are in there and even without the 15 maintainers, and in part because the costs of the parks has just gone up like everything else has gone up. So you and I had a conversation about this, and my intention is to still remove that fringe. It probably wouldn't happen this year. Even with the 15 maintainers, we were told that there would be enough to make it until the next biennium. I don't know where the administration is relative to the passport program. I've also had conversations with Secretary Beckham, and he may want to go a different route. But either way, I want to make sure that we have the funding for you to have the correct staff to handle one of the easiest parts of your, maybe not easiest, but one of the nicest parts of what you get to do within the confines of your agency. So where do we stand on hiring those 15 maintainers?
Well, I just say very briefly, but very emphatically, on behalf of our whole agency and especially our Bureau of Outdoor Recreation, how grateful we are and I am for the committee's recognition of the importance of having adequate staffing to provide to continue to provide the level of services that the public deserves at our amazing state parks. It's been, I think, since the 1980s that we've had a significant increase in the number of parks staff, and with the doubling of the number of visitors that are enjoying our parks since the pandemic started, and that trend has persisted. It's really, really important that we are investing in our staff, who are really the folks who were on the front lines during the pandemic, keeping the parks open. And the Passport to Parks program has made all the difference, not just in removing parking fees so that Connecticut visitors can more easily visit, but also it's enabled us to be flexible and nimble so that we were able to match salaries and attract lifeguards at our beaches. At times, that other states were really struggling. We've been able to help keep up some of the increases for our seasonal pay scale, which is essential to attract workers, but we need to have the funding for the additional staff. So the inclusion of that in the budget book last year was really welcomed by us, and we have initiated the hiring process for 15 full-time positions on our Bureau of Outdoor Recreation. And I will say that we obviously the questions around how those positions are funded for the long term, recognizing that we have a surplus in Passport right now, but as costs are increasing, we anticipate that to be short-lived. And so there's lots of different ways to address the revenue shortfall for the long term, and I'll defer that to OPM. But we certainly, from an operational standpoint, can affirm the criticality of having these additional positions to maintain safe conditions and services at our parks.
And
Okay.
you're all set with that, Mason?
Right.
Very good.
Mason, he adopts that testimony.
Mason and I often talk too, so he
It's Mason
understands.
Trumbull, our Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Conservation.
And we also put some positions in over the last 3 or 4 years relative to environmental conservation officers. And I was wondering, where do we stand on that? Because that was always a concern for people relative to having enough regulatory folks out handling any problems that might be happening.
Thank you, Senator Austin, and hello, folks. Mason Trumbull, Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Conservation. Thank you again for the support. As the Commissioner said, with the increase in outdoor use, these additional MCON officer positions have been absolutely critical to the safe, consistent maintenance of our parks. So we have 62 total sworn officer positions in the state of Connecticut. You had provided funding for 3 additional positions in the last budget. Currently, we have 58 out of our 62 approved positions. We have 58 filled, and we are recruiting 4 ongoing recruitments. So that's the 3 that you gave us plus 1 additional vacancy that we had. We are moving quickly on those and hope to have those wrapped up in the next couple months.
Thank you for that. Again, I can't say how much I appreciate the work that happens in outdoor recreation and our trails. I think that extremely vital for us to have the staff. So while I often hold my colleagues accountable for not going beyond 2 questions, that was essentially 2 questions. So I'm going to throw this over to Representative Walker.
Thank you and good afternoon. Thanks for your testimony. I guess I'm going to sort of add on to Senator Austin's questioning. We put in some money for East Rock and West Rock in New Haven. And part of the funding, I see, has all the funding been expended on that? And if it has, I don't understand how or what has been done. So go ahead.
Yes, I can speak. So East Rock Park is a municipal park, as you know. West Rock Park is a state park.
Correct.
So you are correct. We had funding for both of those. As far as the state park funding goes, at West Rock, we did pave the main road to the summit using those funds.
Okay.
We also added some off-street parking as well, added a picnic area at the top, and we're also working on a couple other projects using the remaining balance of those funds, both at the improving some facilities at the summit and the Lake Wintergreen area as well.
Okay, so that's West Rock.
That's West Rock, correct?
Okay, there was a couple of things that I had brought to somebody's attention was the water offfill from the mountain going into the homes and the problems with the flooding in Westville. Was that ever addressed?
I don't have an update for you on that, but I'm happy to follow up.
Well, yeah, I would, and that was one of the things that I know we had identified as something that needed to be addressed. Yeah.
So we have been providing through our bond-funded climate resilience planning grant program. I know we had an announcement about some of the planning grants that we provided to communities. And I believe that that incorporates that community, but we're happy to follow up in the working group to provide more detail on the status. It's certainly an issue that's affecting Westville and a lot of other communities.
Tremendously. I
Yeah.
mean, the businesses are suffering badly in that area, and I thought that it was already being worked at, but I guess that was my error for forgetting that. So, I would,
Grant, come on up.
come on
We're
up.
being efficient here, so no one's shy. Graham Stevens, our Bureau Chief for Water Planning and Land Reuse.
Good afternoon.
You
so,
are?
My name is Graham Stevens. I'm the Chief of Water Protection and Land Reuse.
Ah.
And so one of the things that DEEP is doing to aid with community resilience is looking at our DEEP Climate Resilience Fund. And in 2023, we awarded grants to communities to study impacts in those communities that are putting the community at risk. And one of those grants was for Westville and looking at the flooding issues that are impacting that community. So our hope is that with this money that doesn't require match, that they can understand what the community impacts are. They can start planning for an infrastructure project and partner with the state to seek federal funds so that we can provide that resilience relief for that community.
How much money was in your total resilience package?
So total, we awarded $8.8 million.
Uh-huh.
And this was at the end of 2023.
Mhm.
We are looking at using additional funds to open up subsequent grant rounds.
Mhm.
This is a really unprecedented time with the
Mhm.
bipartisan infrastructure law, where we want to get as much money as we can for Connecticut's communities.
Mhm.
We've seen the effects of climate change,
Mhm.
from intense rain events to greater erosion to flooding in communities, and we want to ensure that we start making those communities more resilient.
How many projects did you award?
21 different projects were
Twen-
awarded
21 different projects in the state
in the state for
for $8 million?
for $8.8 million. And
Okay.
remember, these projects are to jumpstart planning so that
Okay.
the communities can be ready when federal funding becomes available.
Okay,
And
so
I'll
what
just, add that the planning includes, in some cases, hiring the consultants or even grant writers to help them write the federal applications. There's a lot of funding available through FEMA BRIC. I know New Haven has been the beneficiary of some significant amounts of funding from FEMA BRIC. And so we provided $506,000 to the Greater New Haven Water Pollution Control Authority for that planning project involving Westville and community flooding.
so that went to the
The WPCA.
WPCA, okay.
Correct.
Could you bring to the work group, the projects that were funded
Mhm.
and what was accomplished? So those funds have now been expended, so there's no more funding available?
So there remains additional bond funds in that account.
Okay.
And our plan was to this year launch a next round of grants and an RFP, open statewide, with the idea to offer state matching funds that then could be coupled with local match. And then that would compose the state or local match that would be required by the feds, right, in these federal FEMA grant applications. So we haven't ever had this kind of model before of having an open RFP that municipalities could respond to then ensure that they have assurance of the state match
Mhm.
to compete for the federal dollars. And our goal is with these 21 projects to then move them along to create this pipeline of projects that then can apply competitively for FEMA BRIC and then ideally be able to open additional grant rounds after that.
Okay, I'd like to find out who you've been working with and what,
Super.
because I haven't heard about
Okay.
the rounds and everything, and I'm sure that that's something that, it's important, especially with the amount of water that we've been getting off the mountains. So that's West Rock. Now you say East Rock is a municipal park, but you got allocations for that. So what did you do with the money that you got for the allocation since it was a municipal? Thank you.
Great. So for East Rock Park renovations, the contract has been executed. We know that there's a number of different investments, new benches for baseball Dugouts were purchased and installed, dugouts repainted, new roofs installed, a new scoreboard for the varsity baseball field. There's a number of different milestones that have been accomplished. I believe there's a community meeting that was held on January 23rd virtually to discuss the additional park improvements. And so we'd be happy to bring additional detail on the status of that.
I would appreciate getting the information because I didn't get it from my municipality. So I'd like to find out what we've done in Hartford or New Haven in that area. So I'd appreciate having that. So that was sort of one question.
No, it was not. There's no way on God's green earth that
I'll
that was
come
one
back.
question.
I'll come back. Thank you. Thank you.
So the next person up is Representative Zawistowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about passports to parks. I represent other towns in the northern part of the state, and I hear complaints all the time that they're paying fees on possibly multiple vehicles in their family. And even if they leave their houses at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, there's no guarantee that they're going to get into one of the state beaches. Have you given any consideration to setting aside some slots and take reservations? I know that I went up to Lake Sunapee a couple of years ago and was able to make reservations for the beach at that point. I'm not talking about reservations for everybody. I'm talking about at least so that you can set aside some parking for people who can't get there in a really timely manner.
Yes, thank you, Representative. You're absolutely right. Other parks across the country have explored the reservation model as this, increase in outdoor recreations occurred nationally. We are planning on exploring that this year at one of our parks to pilot it. It's very challenging, as you can imagine. Lots of issues to work out to make sure folks don't reserve spots and not show up when other people could be there. So we want to make sure we get it right. So we're going to pilot that, and we're going to try to pilot that in park this year and see how that works.
And I'd appreciate it if you brought in some people from Northern Connecticut in that conversation as well, because they're the ones that are have limited access to some of the more interesting properties that you have that you would normally charge admission for. And one second question is, do you have something available that would provide information on the health of the dams in the state? I imagine you might have something that you might be able to bring to the working group.
We'd be delighted to do that. Certainly, we appreciate the increased interest in our dam safety programs. And there's a lot of different ownership structures for different dams across the state. The General Assembly and the governor have been very supportive of bond funding for the state-owned dams to ensure that we can continue to keep those in good repair. Our dam safety program also has regulatory responsibilities with respect to privately owned dams, of which there are many across the state. And so we'd be glad to come to the working group and provide more detailed information about the status of our dam safety program and some of the approaches. We've also asked the Environment Committee to raise a concept that could help strengthen our tools with respect to supporting maintenance of privately owned dams.
So you would have information on the privately owned dams as well? that you
Correct.
own. Great. Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And up next, Representative DiCaprio.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. It's good to see you. I don't know if you remember the first time we met. I don't know if you remember. She couldn't get into the building, so I was there and I let her in. She told me who she was, and I said, "You have some ID, ma'am?" And
You may have regretted that.
good to see you and familiar faces there. And it's good to hear about the conservation officers, law enforcement, and the maintainers that you're bringing more people on board. That's very important. Just just for me, I think what I had basically the positions that are going into the radiation division.
Mhm.
Can you just expound on what those folks are going to do, and are they going to be doing emergency response also, or?
Terrific. Glad to provide information on that. We're in the middle of a really positive transformation in seeking agreement state status. That would enable Connecticut to essentially be delegated some of the responsibilities for licensing of businesses that are subject to radiation safety requirements in the state, and delegating that from the NRC down to Connecticut, where we can provide more locally responsive regulation of those businesses. We think we can do so with some efficiencies for the budget. Let me turn it to Tracy Babbage, who's our bureau chief for that division.
Great. Again, the Bureau Chief of the Bureau of Air Management. Nice to see you, Representative. Thank you so much for the question. Just to add on to what the Commissioner said, we would be taking over licensing for radioactive material, and this is instead of, it's not the Millstone power plant or spent nuclear fuel, so it's basically radioactive materials from laboratories and hospitals, those types of things. So we're looking at adding 3 positions. That's what's included in the midterm adjustment, the budget. And one of those would be a supervisory position, and then 2 staff that would be overseeing the licensing. It's 110 licenses in the program. So we would be taking that over in lieu of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and overseeing that, and collecting licensing fees of about $1.7 million, and creating a more direct relationship with these entities, of which our radiation division already has a very close regulatory relationship with these entities. So very positive in many ways to provide certainty to these facilities and direct oversight of radioactive materials in the state.
Okay, thank you very much, Tracy. All right, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Up next is Representative Dathan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you, Commissioner, and to your team for all of your work this year. It's really been phenomenal. One of the things I hear a lot from constituents is enforcement of deep regulations and the agency's enforcement over these regulations. And constantly I'm replying to them is we just don't have enough staff and folks to do that. Can you please elaborate so I can make sure that I'm letting my constituents know why we might not be enforcing all of our regulations?
Sorry. Thank you. It's a very broad question. I'm very proud of the work that DEEP is doing with respect to enforcement. We have over 125 different permitting programs that we are responsible for. Some of them that relate to state requirements, but many of them related to federal requirements. And so we've been delegated down from EPA and other federal agencies to take on the permitting and enforcement responsibilities. And we perform our EPA and other federal agencies regularly audit our programs to ensure that we're performing effectively those delegated responsibilities. We're also launching a new initiative this month called 20 by 26, and it builds on an initiative that we did called 20 by 20, where we're setting 20 performance goals to strengthen the transparency, efficiency, and effectiveness of our permitting and enforcement programs at DEEP. And so we'll be glad to share more about some of the process improvement efforts that we are seeking to undertake with that initiative, including strengthening consistency of approaches to enforcement, the use of financial assurance, which is an important tool related to enforcement and permitting. We are also, looking at ways to better streamline our permitting programs, recognizing that it's often the same FTEs, the same staff within a program that are responsible for both permitting and enforcement. So the more that we can do to be efficient on the permitting side, the more bandwidth we have to do effective enforcement. And I would also add compliance assistance, of course, is the first preference. We want to make sure that we are providing good information and technical assistance to regulated entities on how they can comply with permitting requirements to help to avoid having to get into enforcement status. And so a number of those best practices are incorporated in the report. But I will say that the effectiveness of our ability to carry out all these responsibilities depends on having adequate number of personnel to undertake those efforts, and our efforts around efficiency are, really reflect our commitment to trying to do all of these things as best we can within our available FTEs.
Thank you. I'd love to see more about that 20 by 26 in the working group. My second question is around sort of the food scrap and organic waste pilot programs. I noticed in the solid waste management line item, we had, 4 million in 22, 5.6 in 23. And then we've taken it down to 3.9, both in 24 and 25, with closing of MIRA and trying to encourage municipalities to do more of their share when it comes to diverting organic matter from the, sending it out of state or whatever municipalities are doing. How are we able to manage that program? And can you please bring to the working group some detail around where we are with these pilot programs that we initiated last year? Because I was really hoping to see some more investment from deep in those sort of efforts, because not only does it save a huge amount of money for municipalities to divert the organic matter, it also is great for eliminating emissions for carbon and methane gases. So if you could please bring that to the working group as well, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
We'd be
Madam Chair.
delighted- Yeah, we'd be delighted to do that. And we're putting together a PowerPoint deck that we'll be eager to share to try to really cover the successes and the outcomes of the pilots that we're grateful we were able to fund with the carry forward that was provided in the past budgets. We all told have supported 15 municipal grant contracts, and about half of those are completed. We have a lot of data from different pilot approaches that different municipalities utilized with a combination of Save As You Throw and food scrap diversion programs to help reduce costs on tipping fees for communities, as well as support greater self-sufficiency for the state in our waste management with the closure of MIRA. So I think we have a really strong track record of success and information from those pilots to bring to the legislature as you contemplate any further steps and support for municipal leadership in this area.
Thank you so much. Can't wait to see that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon.
Staffing for these new positions, because we're taking over, some of this regulation for the nuclear energy. Do we have any positions that are unfilled within the agency that we can just say we don't need those in that particular department, and we can move them over to this new department?
Thank you. So first, I would just note that the amount of revenue that will come to the general fund, to the state, from having the licensing fees for this radiation safety program exceeds the cost to the general fund of funding the 3 positions that the NRC will require for us to be able to take over these delegated responsibilities. So net, I would say that achieving this agreement state status is not only positive for better, more responsive regulation of these businesses here in the state, but also it will generate revenue for the general fund. But that said, I think we have made tremendous strides with the 2022 retirement cliff. We had nearly 170 positions that were vacated through retirements and other attrition. And we have done a tremendous job of refilling all those positions. I could not say to you today that if we absorbed the agreement state responsibilities within our existing headcount, that we would not have to curtail or, that we would be able to continue to provide for our responsibilities elsewhere in the agency. We would have to cut something or stop doing something else. But go ahead.
Representative, just to add to what the commissioner just provided, within the radiation division, we've already moved 2 positions to staff up, to begin staffing up for agreement state. So we're able to, within our existing resources, to begin to make sure resources were allocated to begin to work on things like the regulations that need to be put in place, to have everything in place for to satisfactorily become an agreement state and meet all the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's requirements.
So thank you for that. And I think my second question you began to touch on with your answer to my first question. So your testimony says that you're going to bring in $1.7 million that can go to the general fund. Of that, I guess what I'm asking, and if you could do an analysis and bring it to the working group, I'd appreciate it. Of that 1.7 million, what do you actually need to run this particular department within the agency versus what's excess that's going to go to the general fund? I think we all know that our businesses struggle, and if there's an opportunity to reduce fees, I think we'd like to know about that.
We could certainly bring that analysis to the working group.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, you have, I tend to talk about the outside resources that you do, but you also have a large group that handles wastewater and sewerage. So where do we stand relative to that department? And some moved over to DPH, some of the smaller methods, but one of the things that I've been looking at is when we talk about housing, and none of this stuff is in silos, that a number of the housing environments need water and wastewater, and you're the wastewater side and DPH is the water side. And we used to, and I also sit on the statewide plan of conservation and development. And one of the things that was happening before is that sewer expansion was not regularly accepted, in particular in some of our rural communities, for a variety of reasons, not even relative to what the municipalities may want. Where do you stand now on sewer expansion and what we're working on? Hi, Graham.
Senator, thank you for your question again. Graham Stevens, so Chief of Water Protection and Land Reuse. So Connecticut Deep plays a vital role in dealing with our 93 wastewater treatment plants and associated sewer systems throughout Connecticut. And this is a really important question to bring up that we've been talking about really statewide for some time. You know, especially as you look at housing in more rural and even some of our suburban areas, you know, trying to address the housing crisis is challenged by the lack of sewer systems in those areas. So there are alternative sewage disposal systems that could potentially be utilized. There are opportunities for certain sewer expansion that can be realized as well to achieve those housing goals. And the one thing I'd say is that this is really a partnership. We really need to be working very closely across multiple state agencies, including the Office of Policy and Management, who works on the plans of conservation and development. We need to be working hand in hand with the municipalities, particularly those who are interested in expanding housing opportunities across the state. And I think that we have, you know, great folks throughout the state and at municipal government, and we can come together and try to address these challenges.
So one of the 93 systems is the system in Norwich, which you are funding a large portion of that renovation and rehabilitation of their sewer system. But we've also been adding in the small communities around there. We've added in Franklin, Basra, looking to work on Ledyard and Preston, and then ultimately expanding what is already going there from Lisbon and Sprague, so that you would have the 6 communities directly around Norwich to feed into the sewer treatment plant. And they have the capacity built into their expansion. I just consider it one of the most vital things that we work on. We want to make sure that the runoff out of the sewer treatment plants is not impacting our waterways. And we also want to make sure that we're not just allowing sewerage, for example, in Basra, which had a small half-acre housing lots and a pond behind them, but those half-acre housing lots can't move that former septic system anywhere else. There is no, on a half-acre lot, can't go anywhere. So they have to do something. So I'm hoping that people are working more in concert with each other. I think it's important. We don't want that environmental contamination to happen in the pond behind it without trying some way to address some of those issues.
I think you hit the point very clearly. Our first and foremost goal is to make sure that all of our streams and rivers are fishable and swimmable. And, you know, we understand too that pollution just doesn't come from an end of a pipe. There's also, you know, non-point sources, septic systems. They all contribute to our, you know, the pollution in our shared environment. So we need to work together to manage those potential impacts to our environment to ensure that communities, you know, can grow and do so in a sustainable and safe manner.
And I'll say from our experience, these are not small capital investments.
No.
And, you know, state assistance we've seen positive ways where it can catalyze bringing multiple municipalities together or multiple communities together to make these investments. And I think everywhere that this has been successful, it's been a combination of state support plus dynamic municipal and legislative leadership to help bring people around the table and understand the long-term collective benefits of making these investments.
Well, a bill that I put in a number of years ago was to allow USDA to have a 40-year term. Sewer always allowed it a 40-year term, but we should take advantage of the federal side of this equation because the federal side did most of our sewer treatment systems decades ago. It needs to be upgraded, need a lot of work, but they need to remain an active partner relative to that. I also know that through the CIA fund, you get some funds for open space development. You know, I don't mean development, I mean open space acquisition and supporting open space. And so, do you know what you have non-allocated for open space?
Okay. I'm not sure that we have that on hand today, but we'd be glad to bring that to the working group.
So I'm very interested in Camp Laurel, which is in Lebanon, which has done a lot of work for farmland preservation, but this 300-acre former Girl Scout camp is very important to the residents of Lebanon. They would like to, and I get emails all the time from Lebanon and Columbia and Hebron and a number of people whose children camped there, but are very interested in a 300-acre site to be preserved. And so I'm very interested to see what we could accomplish. And I also put a bill in this year to increase although some people may not like it, fees relative to the CIA, which has not seen an increase since it was implemented some 20 years ago. And not only do you get funds from that, but DOAG through Dairy Farm and other farming activities, but historic preservation gets money out of that. And and housing gets money out of that. So do you know how much money you're getting out of the CIA fund every year and where that's going to?
Senator, as the Commissioner, Andrew Hoskins, I'm the Chief of Staff at DEEP. As the Commissioner said, we'll get that exact figure and bring it to the work session. But you know, as you're well aware, the funds from the CIA go towards acquisitions. They also there's some administrative carve-outs that go towards staffing as well. The portion that goes towards acquisition is combined with the bond funds, the open space bond funds And so while I'd be happy to get that figure, I will say that the open space program and the funding available to it right now are very healthy
Right.
across the board. And there's a lot of capacity right now. You'll see a bill that we have asked the Environment Committee to raise that, or the governor's resilience bill that relaxes and helps to make it easier for certain entities to apply for open space funding.
Well, again, I'm a huge fan of saving open space. We can't make it. And so whatever we can salvage, in particular in large watersheds, is extremely important. So you also handle Indigenous folks right now. There's been some talk about moving it over to the Office of Policy and Management, and I still look forward to having a conversation with you about this. Because I want to make sure that the people that we're trying to assist through the Indigenous communities that the state recognizes, and you've done a lot of work with the 3 only state recognized tribes. Where do we stand right now on the 3 projects that we put out for Eastern Pequots, Golden Hill Bogussets, and Schaghticoke?
Senator, thank you for your question. So for the Eastern Pequot project and the Golden Hill Pagusset project, we are continuing to work with Wyeth Architects, who is the selected architect, to revise their designs that they've submitted so that they're more in line with the available funding for those projects. The initial design schematics that they submitted would have required, significant additional funding that's just not available at this time. So
Right.
we're working on, changing some of the elements of the design, shrinking the footprint, et cetera, to still accomplish, what the tribes are looking for in those areas. We're confident that we can help to get them there very shortly. For the project in the Schaghticoke Reservation, a land survey of the area was completed in March 2023, and an archaeological assessment report was also completed in October of 2023, and that was endorsed by SHPO. We are still, seeking to gain consensus between the 2 factions of that tribe so that we can proceed with the work on the reservation.
So I've looked at documents related to the original configuration that you've been able to hire a staff attorney and administrative assistants for, and that show that decision was made or accepted many years ago at that committee for Chief Felke. And I just want to make sure that we're not having a redo of a conversation that happened. And I don't disagree with coming to consensus amongst any group of people, but at some point we have to make a decision. And that particular grant was to help out with a burial ground. And we all know back in the 20s or so, the state legislature allowed the flooding of an Indian burial ground in Kent, Connecticut. And those remains, some of those remains, they gave them a 2-week time frame. And back then it was hard to move things around. It wasn't like today where we have bigger and better equipment, but they moved bodies in the back of horse-drawn carriages and have pictures of that. Some of the remains still are underwater there. So through consensus of the parties, it looked to expand the current burial ground and not do what was originally intended, was to put a retaining wall and remove the water from that burial ground. So I just want to make sure that we're going to get that done, because it's really a disgrace that, in my opinion, that we have not been able to move forward for the Schaghticoke tribal nation. And I just want to keep that at the top of your list of things, many things to do. I also, again, I have more things with your agency than most people, so I apologize. I put in a bill for $20 million for to set up a fund that could be directed through the Office of Policy Management in coordination with the state agencies to handle things that happen as a result of an emergency directly related to weather in particular, but any emergency. So DEEP, DOAG, DOT, and the rains that we had over the last year have greatly distressed communities at large. In Norwich, not to be left out of any other conversation, but we had a dam that was a privately owned dam that had a significant problem with one of their wing walls that if it had collapsed would have created havoc in the Norwich area. And I think a lot of people don't recognize the fact that a dam upstream has large impacts on downstream activities. Would you be able to use those funds? And I wouldn't care if it was a loan to somebody or something that you had to do work that you could attach to the owner, but would also give you an opportunity to use those funds on an emergency basis. And you have no other way, when I've looked at bond funds, of having funds available to do this. Would you find something like this of value?
So I will defer in terms of the funding and the governor's budget to OPM, but I will say that with respect to the acceleration of climate change and the extreme weather events that we're responding to now more on a daily, monthly basis, I applaud the interest in ensuring that our agencies are able to respond effectively to provide emergency support services to keep the public safe in these unusual circumstances. And I would say that we've been looking at this. What we have perhaps one example that may be instructive, which is with our emergency spills management program, where we have first responders who come on scene, are able to bring in contractors quickly to handle emergency spills, and then we handle the collection from the private parties, after the fact. But that is one where, as we contemplate, the possibilities of things like supporting dam, possible dam failures, the dollar amounts involved in making those, bringing contractor on scene to be able to make something safe may be significant. And so ensuring that we have enough cash on hand to be able to handle those getting those contracting services on quickly is helpful, as well as ensuring that we have certain emergency authorizations to come on private property or begin to do work if necessary. We're just identifying some of these unanticipated or first of a kind situations, and making sure that we have, the funding and the authorities necessary to keep the public safe in these circumstances. So the governor's resilience bill and also the dam safety concept that we have asked the Environment Committee to raise get into some of those regulatory or authority pieces as well, but certainly glad to talk about some of our experience, like with the emergency spills program, that might be a model or might be instructive.
Thank you for that, because again, I think you have to have some flexibility, and there isn't a lot of flexibility in your current bond allocations. And so I think that that's something that we need to make sure that we had 3 bridges come down in one storm in Scotland, a very tiny town, not in my district, but right down the road from me. The dam in Norwich, the rail bed in Wyndham. These things are happening on a regular basis. The farming calamities that happened along the Connecticut River, all things that the state ended up with taking on some of those responsibilities. And I think that we have to really pay attention to providing you with the resources. And we may never tap into it, God willing, we never have another natural disaster. I just don't think that that's what's going to happen over the next little bit of time. So, and my last question is relative to Pura and your energy. Tried to touch almost every area in your agency. and
We brought
so-
everyone, so everyone appreciates having a chance to get questions.
is, we all know that energy costs are high in the state of Connecticut. That's something that, we have talked about, relative to a lot of different things. And so, what do you have as your vision for Pura in, interfacing, in costs, disregarding everything else, the cost to the average person, that each of us represents, relative to energy?
Senator, thank you for the question. For the record, my name is Marissa Gillette. I am the chair of the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, also known as PURA. How to start addressing that question, which is a great one. I would say over the past 5 years of my tenure, we have really focused on affordability. It's difficult to discuss, energy in Connecticut without facing the fact that we have some of the highest rates in the country on a per kilowatt hour basis, coupled with knowing that we need to invest further in the grid. And with that, I think it's incumbent on all of us to understand all the levers at our disposal, the portions of the electric grid that we do regulate and the portions of the bill that we don't regulate. And I think we're really focused through the performance-based regulation effort, which has been championed both by this legislature as well as the governor, dating back to the Take Back Our Grid Act. We're focused on understanding what it is that collectively want out of our electric grid and what and how we can get there. And the performance-based regulation docket is really focused on that, meaning rather than regulating the utilities through traditional methods of cost of service regulation, which really focuses on providing profits to the utilities based on how much they invest. Performance-based regulation, rather, is about PURA, the legislature, DEEP, other stakeholders, determining what it is we want out of the grid, setting those desired outcomes, and then regulating the utilities and sending them signals on how we want them to achieve those outcomes. So affordability is top of mind. It has been defined by the industry as of late as spending no more than 6% of your disposable income. With the legislature's guidance and the administration's guidance, we have recently established the low-income discount rates for electric customers, which are offered 10% discount and a 50% discount based on your disposable, your income level. So we are continuing to keep affordability front of mind in all of our endeavors.
Well, thank you, because I've read some most recent articles where nationally there is some $600 million in inability for people to pay utility bills, not just in the state of Connecticut. This is broadly across the country. So I think that that's an admirable goal, and I appreciate that. Senator Hartley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner and staff, thank you so much for being with us and being patient with us, in all honesty, as we kind of go through this process. I first of all wanted to ask a general question, if it hasn't already been asked, and that is, the macro look. Can you give for us in this next round a summation of any ARPA dollars that have not been spent, and then those ARPA dollars that are now funding programs or initiatives that will end as a result of that funding terminating? In addition, carry forward numbers, so we can just kind of have that global look. And then I would like to talk to you about the Perennial Transfer Act, the release-based model. So actually not now, but I want to give a big shout out to that team and Graham who headed it up, because I don't know what month or what year we're into this thing, but it's an endurance test here. This is more than a marathon. In fact, it goes back decades. So this is so important that we get it this time, because this is it. But I would like to have the benefit, if I could, of some of your team's time, just to maybe have a sidebar up to date with leadership of the Commerce Committee and whomever you think is appropriate. I confess that I haven't been with you in a number of moons here because, this has been a very, very long and tedious process. But having said that, I just want to ask about another part of this that now gets layered on. And when we started all of this, quite frankly, we weren't having to deal with it, and that's PFAS. Now, last year you did some initiative for analyzing farm soil. It's so appropriate. We now have 4,000 plus maybe properties still caught in this Transfer Act pipeline. And what we're experiencing right now is we're seeing that there is even further gridlock because of the PFAS issue. There was, I think, probably a very preliminary initiative to do some mapping, and I think it might have been done through the University of Connecticut. I'm not sure if it was the extension program or whoever, but short of that, and it was a very preliminary, as I said, we do not have any mapping. And so now we are caught in this place where LEPs don't have a frame of reference. If we look at our neighbors, we see that, for example, Massachusetts has established some thresholds and some framework, and by which we can begin to move on. Yes, you get out of Dodge. No, you don't. We need to do this and do this very, very quickly. If you want to comment on this, because I know it's a long conversation, but yeah.
Hi, Senator Hartley. Graham Stevens, again, Chief of Water Protection and Land Reuse. So PFAS is something that DEEP is very interested in. We are partnering with the Department of Public Health and other state agencies to implement the governor's PFAS action plan. And one of the items in the PFAS action plan is what you're referring to, which is trying to establish what is the background levels for PFAS on a property that even may not have had a chemical release containing PFAS. And that is something that we are speaking with the Environmental Professional Organization of Connecticut, the group that is the membership organization for licensed environmental professionals who conduct investigations and cleanup in Connecticut. And the way that we look at pollution releases in Connecticut is that you have to clean up to a standard or to background. And as part of our release-based cleanup program, we're introducing for the first time ever walkaway numbers or background numbers for metals. So we have established a process whereby, based on literature, that if there's a certain level of metals, if you're below that, it's not considered a release. If you're above that, there's a methodology for determining, is it background or is it a release? And that's a new approach that we're proposing in the cleanup program. Now, the science on PFAS is emerging, why it's called an emerging contaminant. And we are looking at what other states are doing. We are looking to US EPA for additional guidance as well. And we're happy to continue speaking with the legislative leaders on studies that may be, possible to determine, what is the level below which the PFAS in the environment would not be considered a release.
Thank you. That's really important. And so I think we look forward to continuing to flush that out. I will make one footnote though, with regard to, that transition from Transfer Act to release-based, in particularly, because this is, a rabbit hole for sure, but the issue of residential property is something that I think we've got to circle the wagons here and have some very explicit conversations. So that's TBC. And so I know that we're over the time here, but and not to get parochial, but I'm going to. Two things, Commissioner, the weatherization program in Waterbury, still not up and running. still no services, delay after delay. I can't justify it. And I'm not going to ask you to do that now, but I want some conclusion because now the whole winter is almost beyond us and we still have not gotten a weatherization program in my district. An urban city with some of the poorest census tracts in the state. And we're dealing with an out-of-state entity. You don't have to get into it now because I don't want to get over the edge here, okay? But
Bring
let's,
it to the working group.
yeah, this has got to be concluded. And then lastly, if I might just ask you about the enforcement relative to our trails with respect to the ATVs and the dirt bikes. We have a problem also in the district, and it's really gotten to the point of a safety concern. We've got horses on a trail, and we've got dirt bikes, and they're confronting each other. So, we can't get any enforcement. So I've tried to kind of connect on this, and hopefully we can also find some resolve. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And to the working group, if you could bring an update on the fish hatcheries and on commercial fishing and what we're doing directly for commercial fishermen.
We'll be glad to do that. And also, Senator Hartley, I know you raised a number of things, would love to respond to, and certainly we'll be glad to do that in the working group in the interest of time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming in. I don't know if we missed a single part of your agency.
I think you were very comprehensive and we appreciate the questions and the support.
Thank you. Up next is the Department of Economic and Community Development. That's it.
So I'm Dan O'Keefe. If we're
Hi, Commissioner. How are you?
I'm very well. So
Do you
Commissioner
want to
designate technically.
Yes, yeah. Don't worry about it. I mean, we still got to vote, but I don't see any great upheaval here. Commissioner, you want to say a few words or do you want us to get right into questions?
I think we can jump right in. If that's
Okay.
okay.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for coming. I know that you're another agency that is quite large and does a lot of different things. So for discussion purposes, on page 16 of the handouts on the budget, there was a section that talked about various grants moving from general fund appropriation to carry forward. Some of this has already this will have a negative impact by doing that because it removes those grants from the general fund in perpetuity. And a number of these have been there in perpetuity. So didn't know if you wanted to talk about that for a quick second.
And I am joined today by the DECD staff, so it's okay. I'll call folks up as they have more relevant expertise. And this is one area where Kyle does.
Hi, everyone. Kyle Abercrombie, Chief Administrative Officer with DECD. So for that situation, basically we're taking other expense funding that was used for a sustainable aviation initiative. There was an application by Yukon and Pratt & Whitney that was unsuccessful. So we're taking that funding and using it towards these various grants line items. Two things I would say is we can get you a full write-up on like how that's all working. But I would say in fiscal year 24 and 25, that's having no impact on the grant recipients and our ability to administer them.
So I'm more worried about what happens in 26 with these because then they come off of the list. And if you could get us the dollar amount that was the whole write-up, the dollar amount that you have as carry forward for the project that didn't go anywhere, so that we have those dollars. And was it only was it $8 million or was there more there?
I believe there was 12 million earmarked, and about 8.75 is being used for the various grants line item.
And the rest of it is being used for what?
I'm not sure. I think that's a better conversation with OPM.
Okay. All right. And my second question is relative to the American Rescue Plan. And just so you know, for example, the Friends, that's on the next page, on page 17. The Friends of Chautauqua River Valley has recently completed their application, so I'm just letting you know others may have completed their application to draw down those dollars. So they're not going to be available to be removed from ARPA. They're being spent in the way that was originally designed for them to be spent. I have a number of questions, but those were my two initial ones, and I know that Representative Paris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, how are you?
Very well. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So you have here, based on what the governor is providing in his budget, an additional $1 million for statewide marketing. I'd like for you just to walk through your vision in terms of how you plan to allocate the additional $1 million in statewide marketing to ensure a well-rounded and more impactful year-round marketing presence for our state.
Great, happy to. And I'm joined by our state's Chief Marketing Officer, Anthony. Let me give a quick high level, and then I'll leave it to him to talk about some of the details. You know, we are seeing an influx post-pandemic of tens of thousands of new residents coming into the state. That is a moment where states in the region are losing people. New York is losing people. Massachusetts is losing people. So we do view this as a moment where we want to tell that story. There's something happening in Connecticut right now, and we want to continue to drive that.
So simple. Thank you. Showing my lack of experience on these microphones. For the record, I'm Anthony, Chief Marketing Officer for DECD. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. In short answer, it is ad spend. That $1 million will go straight to ad spend, and here is the justification on why. We know, based upon focus groups and studies that we have done, that our marketing is more effective than industry standards. So people who have seen our marketing versus people who have not are 57% more likely to go out and actually take action, meaning go to CT visit or book a ticket to any one of the destinations or hotels that they're looking at. So with that being said, the reason we want to use ad spend is we can spread the word further and faster into more people, and that will get more people coming to the state, more people aware of Connecticut, and increase visitation, which we see as the gateway to getting more residents and eventually more businesses coming to the state.
I appreciate that, and hopefully the ad spend will help people make it here. No pun intended, of course.
Well done.
No, I appreciate you using that and using it correctly.
Thank you. I might win some points with the governor on a Friday afternoon. I will also say, you know, I would love to see moving forward, maybe we can move this over to the working group just in terms of how those metrics will be calculated and how you'll present that to us so that we do know that the effectiveness of the $1 million investment and how that's actually working in terms of how we're monitoring the people from that ad spend coming into the state and what they're doing and where they're going. So we can save that for the working group, Madam Chair. That was my second question. I will wait for my second time. Thank you.
Representative Walker.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Great to see you, Commissioner.
You too.
I'd like to know, where are you with your ARPA fund projects, and which ones have been completed? Which ones are in process?
Great. And Liz could join me just to talk about.
The short answer is we'll get you the full write-up. We already have it prepared and we'll send it over to you. But from looking at fiscal year 22, 23, 24, we're about 70% of all of our line items are completed, and we're actively working on all the remaining ones, except for the ones noted in the governor's budget proposal.
Okay, so when you say, one of the, couple of things that we've noticed in the ARPA funds throughout the agencies is that every agency had a different way of approaching ARPA funds, which we didn't know until, I guess, about a year later. But when you did the ARPA funds, did you require the agency to spend any of their own money before any funding was passed on to them? Or did the contract come first? What was the process? Because everybody kept giving us different process, which is why we kept chasing the carrot, and that's why we never caught it, because it was always different.
Yeah, so I'll let the experts speak on this, but to put it simply, there's various eligibility pathways that you can go through to obtain an ARPA grant. Sorry.
Pat?
It's the soundtrack to your answer.
Yeah.
So there's various eligibility pathways that you can go down to receive your ARPA grant. One of them is a beneficiary, where it's, straight up, we process the funding and you get it and you can use it for pandemic relief purposes. But there's other pathways that may require you to spend the money and then get reimbursed for it. And those are typically more capital intensive things where we need to see the receipts. But I don't know if that's a perfect answer, if you want to add anything.
That's the short answer.
That's the short answer. And we're happy to, talk more about ARPA.
I apologize.
It's quite all right.
Sometimes we forget we've got other things
Hey, it's
going on.
Friday.
Yeah, oh God, is it Friday?
Oh,
Thank God.
yeah,
it's Friday. So the short answer is that it depends on whether it was like,
The use
it
of
was
funds.
a project or whether it was a program. So, capital, I'm sorry, capital, or whether it was a program. Those are the two different varying.
It's, there's more than that.
Okay.
And let me just step aside and let Liz answer this one. Yeah.
Hello there. How are you?
I'm well. Hi, for the record, I'm Elizabeth Shapiro. I'm the Director of Arts Preservation and Museums with DECD. So I had the pleasure of being the primary steward behind getting most of DECD's ARPA funding out the door. I think the hardest thing to explain about ARPA is that when ARPA came out, there was no federal treasury guidance that came with it, right? And so what you began to understand was followed shortly after what we began to understand. And pretty much the way things went is that every time we began to understand, more treasury guidance came out.
Yeah.
And so processes changed. And of course, we were guided in everything that we did by OPM. We worked in very close partnership with them. But of course, ARPA, this whole program was extremely rigorous. And so folks at OPM changed over. So we were trying to manage, like everybody else, a moving target.
Mm-hmm.
There are multiple paths of getting the money out the door. And the further we came in to more sort of detailed treasury guidance, the more we had to ask from our applicants in order to justify spending. And quite a bit of this has to do with the fact that in many, many states, they're being audited for their ARPA spending. And so what we've wanted to be really, really clear on is that the ARPA spending through DECD, which is where we have jurisdiction, is moving exactly the way that it should be moving. And we're not making any mistakes. And unfortunately, sometimes that's slow. The other issue is that it's really easy to get beneficiary payments out. And that's what Kyle was spoken about. So if we can give a payment to an organization because they have had a really hard hit by the pandemic, or they fall into one of a lot of categories, frankly, that's the easy way to get it out the door. We can do that pretty quickly. But if there is any other thing that's going on, any kind of program that they're running, capital expenses, as you said, sometimes money was given to organizations where it may have been easier for a municipality to receive the money for the same project rather than the organization. So we've had to go through risk assessments multiple times, sometimes with some of these organizations, work with changing volunteers. So I'm really proud of what we've accomplished, especially when folks at OPM share what where other agencies are standing in terms of their ARPA funds. Normally, pre-pandemic, the Office of the Arts gave out about $6.9 million. We have 4 program staff and 1 grant staff. In fiscal year 2022, we gave out $66 million of money, same staff. And last year we gave out over $64 million. So we're getting it out the door. We're just paying attention.
I have to say, in your defense, it got to the point where if they couldn't figure out what agency, they said, oh, DECD. And they did, oh, DECD. And I would ask, well, how did it get there? Oh, you were the catch-all for anybody they couldn't figure out. So
Right.
I totally agree with you on that. But the thing that we worried about was, one, we as legislators were having a hard time because we had places that needed investments. And we didn't know how it was going to be done. And most of our communities are where we put most of the money because our communities are crumbling. And most of the programs that we put the money into didn't have, 3 and 4 staff deep. It was, I mean, a lot of them were very much grassroots. So we were trying very hard to sort of run defense for the programs that we're doing, but it was, so long story short, I'd like to know where we are.
Sure.
I know we've tried to get reports from you guys on different agencies, and we've been sort of hesitant about giving you out too much information because we sometimes have to be the interpreters for these organizations, because if they hear it from you, then they're going to say, oh, I don't want it because I don't know how to do it. But they're not going to say they don't know how to do it. But a lot of them have the ability to do what we envision. It's just getting them over that little bit of fine too. And it's not as if they're hiding anything. They just don't know because they're small organizations and things. And they are the backbone of our community. So, I mean, we've just tried to be as supportive as possible, but sometimes it takes a very long time for us. So sometimes we'll find out about an organization that we thought was already down the road, and then we find out, oh, you just got a piece of paper and it's nothing's there. So we want to work together to make Connecticut great. So the best way we can do this, because we have such a short time frame, is to be very honest about where we are so that we can make sure that it doesn't get absconded in the wrong direction. Let me say that again. So it doesn't get absconded in the wrong direction.
Right. No.
I hope you understand what I mean.
We do.
We 100% do.
Okay, so you've got us on speed dial. Call appropriations. We will get whatever you need, but please call us. If we have to, we can have weekly meetings because we have it with everybody else, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I know I've sat with Senator often, even on virtual calls, and worked through applications with people. So
So thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, I know more about contracting than I ever wanted to. So, up next is Representatives Zawistowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Thank you for being here today and welcome aboard. I've been here long enough that I've looked under DEC, you have a whole pile of grants to different venues, to different events. And I tend to see, I'm seeing pretty much the same numbers every year. Is there any type of process that you do with these organizations to find out whether or not they're reaching self-sustainability, so that you could possibly reduce the grants in the future and possibly open those dollars to new organizations on perhaps a merit-based opportunities for different organizations? I would love to see that spread around a little bit more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna put my foot right into this one, because I've been working with the Connecticut Humanities, which developed a really fantastic system of analyzing what was going on with grants that went out. And I think that mechanism is a way to deal with what you're trying to do there. And so all of you who are looking at that today, maybe can, oh no, I'm sorry, I can't read. I can't read with my glasses on. It's really
Let me,
bad. But I do think that having a percent of the meals tax is a way to fund the tourism fund, which would deal with this, because then we would actually know what's going on in all of these instead of wiping them all out and trying to do that, but analyzing all of them to make sure that they're doing something with it. So I agree with you. I just have a different way of getting to that point.
Yeah, and certainly valid.
Sorry.
I'm not talking about just the tourism either. I'm talking to a lot of some of these other ongoing grants. I think that you have a duty to make sure that they're being spent in the right way and maybe, and just weaning people off of these grants, at least to some degree.
Right.
So that, you have a successful organization, it should start showing that it's successful.
Yeah. Well, maybe first, let me just comment. First of all, thank you for the welcome. And I think everyone's aware I'm a relatively new commissioner, now commissioner designate, which means I'm relying upon the great staff of the DECD to answer some of the more nuanced questions, which I would put this in
And
that
you've
bucket.
got a very good one sitting next to you.
I completely wholeheartedly agree. But what I would also say, though, just sort of stylistically, is I'm very open to feedback. So as I learn more about the programs and the work of the DECD, I very much welcome a dialogue about ways we can do things better.
So I think some of you know how closely we've been working with Connecticut Humanities, and pretty much every decision and every program and every way of analysis that they have been doing, we've turned over to them to do for the sector, because it's so much easier to do some of these things outside of state government. So that's the first thing, and it's quicker. I think there's two answers to the question. One is that, so I'm going to use the Office of the Arts as an example, because probably some of the organizations you're thinking of are funded through our 1.497.
Yes, but I'm not picking on any particular
No.
organization.
No, oh, no, 100%. It's a little bit, I'm not going to say it's complicated, but it's in the works. So what happened was we moved most of our funding into general operating support as soon as the pandemic happened. So we moved away from things like project support because organizations needed general operating support. And I fully support that, having been in the trenches. But what we didn't ask at the time is, what are you accomplishing? How are you measuring what you're accomplishing? And always had the idea that that is the next step in the process as we are coming into what I call the next pre-pandemic time, right? Because we have to be prepared to be moving forward. That's how we look at our discretionary funds. We have to be able to apply that to other organizations that receive tourism funds directly through, line items and other funds that we give out. Because again, our funding that we have discretionary ability to spend is only about $1.5 million, but there's another $5.7 million that we simply give out, at the direction of legislation. So I would love to be working further with appropriations or whomever is interested in that to figure out how to move forward so we can do this in a real equitable manner. So organizations that are doing great work are recognized for the great work that they're doing.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you again for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Up next is Senator Hartley, followed by Senator Winfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, Commissioner and team. And I know you're interim, but I just want to welcome you because I think this is your maiden voyage here before appropriations. So hopefully it'll be a wonderful experience.
I've already lost all my hair, so you guys can't do any more damage.
And we'll be able to get into a whole lot more detail once we get into these smaller group sessions. But, and I've asked everyone, and you've talked a little bit about it, just to get that macro summary from the agency of ARPA dollars unspent and those that will be ending and programs, having to be supplanted or changed would be a helpful start in our conversations. And then I'd also just kind of like some update information. Where is the hospitality industry, having gone through the pandemic, having gone through, really the DECD, guardrails that were so helpful here? I mean, I know of many that we've lost. I don't know of how many are still out there or hanging on. And then I'm constantly approached by restaurateurs who are asking me, can they continue to have their outside venues, and that they are in this gray area of, the regulatory local zoning situation. And having done it, they feel it's so important to their business now. And quite frankly, those, their customers, myself included, like being outside. So it's probably a lot to ask right now, but if you can get us information about that, and I'm very interested, about, what you're experiencing with regard to, those outside parts of businesses that have now been developed as a result of that.
Right. And what I can maybe respond now generally, and we're happy to get into more detail during the working session, but I mentioned some of the post-pandemic population trends that we're seeing. And I think fundamentally that comes down to the vibrancy of our communities. I think these folks are attracted to not just hospitality and restaurants, but communities that have incredible energy and are incredible places to live and raise their families. So I view hospitality as part and parcel with community vibrancy, which I view as part and parcel with economic development. So it is a priority for us. And while I don't have, specific data at my fingertips right now, we'd be happy to engage around more specificity. I think
Yeah.
it does need to remain a priority for us.
Thank you. And then, also, I've just received lots of information about those states that have, with regard to the hospitality situation, and maybe this is crossing over lanes, have engaged in the tip wage model, if you will, where restaurants have closed as a result of that. Washington, D.C. is one place that's reporting that, as well as New York City. And so I'm just concerned about the decisions we make going forward. I do think that we are still in a very vulnerable time for business, and particularly small business. And, we want to be prudent going forward. And then if I might ask another kind of global question, and if you want to summarize it in our work groups, that's fine. But I want to know about the return to work for women. We obviously saw what happened during the pandemic when women in particularly, bore a greater burden, or a great burden, in terms of childcare, home care, had to step out of the workplace. And, have they come back? We saw pre-pandemic, the percentage of women in the workforce was over 50%. We know that drastically dropped. And I'd like to know how we're doing as a state with regard to that.
So let me first say that, our lens of the DECD is economic development. And so the way that for an economy to sustain at its optimal level, we need to be pulling on every lever. I agree with your comments that women were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and I think it needs to remain a priority that we help get them all back to work, those that want to and choose to. Childcare, as you know, is a priority for the governor. It's not necessarily directly within the DECD, but we will look forward to supporting all of those efforts.
Right, but I do see Kelly sitting here.
Yeah, well, Kelly, would you like to talk specifically, please?
Thank you, Senator Hartley. Kelly Valerie's Chief Workforce Officer. Yes, we agree with you. We are looking at how we're supporting women back to work as a barrier to entry. So when we think about those barriers as childcare, transportation, housing, the work that we're doing with the Career Connect ARPA dollars has really been focused on removing those barriers. About 50% of the people who are being served with Career Connect dollars are women. So we're happy to see that the support to women is helping them get over some of those barriers. We're also working closely, with the Office of Early Childhood and their unprecedented work with you in the legislature and the governor on childcare barriers. It tends to be one of the largest reasons for women not getting back into the workplace. So we are paying close attention to that and making sure that the programming that is being available to people is being utilized by women as well as men.
And so you are aware of the legislation last year, which established a childcare incubator program. It was a pilot program. There is now conversation about changing that status so that there were 7 communities, that any community can stand up an incubator, once again, to try to meet the demand, because childcare industry, I'm talking economics, not childcare per se, I'm talking the economic side of it. We lost many of them for a lot of the reasons we've already talked about, but obviously that translates to our workforce and meeting our demands in terms of the employment sector. So we'll have more to see on that. So I don't know if I'm over. I see Kathy's trying to push the button. I got some more questions in here.
Just,
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going on to Senator Winfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon. I have a question about Social Equity Council. And this goes to the governor's speech and some of the conversation I've been listening to. So in the governor's speech, he suggested that there was a hope that the Social Equity Council put money towards homelessness and early childhood and some other things. And I did ask a question about this and was told it was largely a suggestion. I don't take anything that the governor says in his budget speech as just a suggestion. So my question is, where are we with the Social Equity Council? How are we determining what we're going to spend money on? And I would just say to you, as one of the people that came up with the concept of the Social Equity Council, as well, at least the Social Equity Fund, which the council has a duty to kind of disperse. I am concerned about what is happening. It feels very much like we're trying to discover how to create a wheel when we have really advanced tires. DECD puts money out all the time. I'm worried about money going into the community and going to things that are not the things we otherwise should be doing in the budget. So if you could speak to that a little bit, that would be very useful.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Senator Winfield. This is Ginny Ray Clay, Executive Director of the Social Equity Council, and good afternoon to everyone here. So prior to the governor's speech, we did have an update meeting with him, and we gave him an update on the work that the council has been doing in the community. And I believe the comments that he made reflect what the community is looking for. So the community indicated to us that there were certain things that they wanted and needed more opportunities and more resources for, and they were housing, childcare, reentry programs, and what we call sort of the self-help. We have grassroots organizations that are doing programming in their communities. They want more resources towards that. I think I just said self-help programs where I can do a chess program. And the Social Equity Council is very much interested in helping those grassroots organizations. So in our meeting with him, we let him know that some of the things that he mentioned as a priority were the things that the council had heard, and the council has planned to, on their own, put money and resources into that, but through the funding of grassroots organizations. So we do not have the intention of providing money to state agencies, but to look at some of the organizations that state agencies are supporting. I'm sorry, community organizations that agencies are supporting and helping them to enhance their programs.
And I just want I would just say this. Many of those organizations want to do that stuff because we're not doing it the way we should be doing it right now. That does, to my mind, that doesn't negate the importance of it, but it also doesn't mean that this is how it should be done. And I am very thankful that you all are looking at this, but the intention was to be doing things that we otherwise should not be doing. So I will reinsert myself deeply into this conversation to make sure that we are actually doing what was intended by those who wrote the social equity stuff into the budget. Thank you.
And by the way, just perhaps one point of clarification that's not necessary, which is that the Social Equity Council is administered by the DECD, but has its own separate board. So that being said, though, if I could be helpful in engaging around what that original intent was, I'm happy to discuss with you directly. With
Thank
that
you.
qualification that the DECD does not in any way control the SEC.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Porter?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good to see you. I was actually a part of those community meetings, so I definitely agree that that's where all of that kind of was birthed out of, the conversations as we went from different communities, specifically in New Haven. And as someone as well who worked hard to make sure that equity was on the front burner of this whole process, and making sure that the Social Equity Council had some kind of power. I just want to add to the conversation that there is concern around the social equity applicants and their voices being heard. And just making sure that as we move forward, that the issues that they're having are being addressed, and they don't really feel heard right now. So I'm the go-between. And I just want to voice that for them here today in this public forum, so that they know it's not falling on deaf ears. And just to add to that, Jenny Ray, the relationship that we have is above board. So I'm fully confident that we will get where we need to be, but we're going to have to do a little more grassroots communications and making sure that the people closest to the problems, which are the social equity applicants, are at the table and they're being heard, and they feel like they're being heard. There's some kind of action to back up what it is they're struggling with, because there's several barriers that are in play right now. So we can have a further discussion offline, but I just wanted to make you all aware of that. And just to thank you for the work that you're doing and for the transparency, and to how available you make yourself to people in the community as well as the lawmakers. So I appreciate you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Dillon?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And good afternoon, Commissioner Designate.
It's a mouthful.
Welcome. I believe we've spoken already, and hello. And I know some people in your department, not others. But I did want to identify some issues that we've had. This may surprise you, but legislators don't always agree on everything. And in fact, even when we represent one town, that town is not uniform, right? You may have resources in one area. I represent working artists, for example, more than I represent, let's say, institutions. People don't think of working artists necessarily. And they're not big shots, you know, but they're that happens elsewhere in the state. But also a lot of small business, and which means that I don't like the restaurant tax, because their profits already are going. The restaurants in my district are paying DoorDash already, and the restaurant tax is getting harder given the cost of food. I know that that's controversial because we take it because we can, but that's not necessarily uniformly loved. I just want to identify a particular issue that's going on with your department, and particularly with DEEP, although not only, and that is concerning distressed municipalities. The formula for distressed municipalities, it's a long history. I'm going to it, although I could. But the formula is generated internally by your department. Towns fall off on and off of that. The statute has only been amended once for distressed municipalities, and that was for Eastern Connecticut. It was not amended. Otherwise, the formula is internally generated. If you fall off the list, you're supposed by statute to be considered a distressed municipality for 5 years. However, we learned that that statute is not self-enforcing. That is, everyone very often in your department or in Deep would say, there is no issue, you're covered. And yet maps keep going out from that were generated by your department that leaves New Haven off, which has cost a lot of money in grants. Not, huge, dramatic, it could be something to stem flooding, although not the one that Representative Walker mentioned, and I'm thrilled she did that. It could be, for trees here or for tree removal there. Repeatedly, I've been told everything's okay, and then a map goes out, and then New Haven isn't on it, and all of a sudden I find out my water authority or whoever, or a private nonprofit, whoever applying for a grant doesn't get it. Now, I was informed a month ago that the use of the maps is discretionary and that some states and counties use some kind of map and others use others. I can't believe that I can't even say I'm in the weeds. There must be some smaller unit of measurement than weeds, but this is crazy. But your department generates it. Your department generates the maps. And everybody else, whether it's public utilities or Deep, gets that information from your department. So I thought we straightened it
Excuse
out.
me,
We need to.
Representative Dillon, what is the question?
I would like you to fix the problem because we're not on your map.
Do you have any commentary here?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Yes,
I
Kyle?
really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Happy to respond. So our agency is responsible for doing the calculation to create the distressed municipalities list. We're not always aware of what other entities are using that list to do other programs. Through conversations with you, Representative, we've made it a priority to be more transparent about the 5-year window where municipalities who fall off the list are still eligible. So on our website, we made a few changes to make that front and center. So when other people go to look at the list, they see that there is this 5-year sunset period. But we can't control other agencies' maps and how they're using the list, unfortunately.
Well, we can work it out offline, online,
Yeah.
on the floor of the house, wherever we can do it. It just, thank you, Madam Chair, but this is crazy making.
Yeah,
It has to get fixed.
Yeah, no, we're happy to partake in any conversations towards making this more transparent so other agencies can use our information fairly.
I think that this is an OPM issue. So, because they can't make another agency do something, so, but OPM can. So I think that you should draft that up and we'll get it over to OPM.
Super. We'll
Thank
put
you.
that on the list. Thank you.
Representative Paris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Connecticut, we all love it. We know that. And I think every decision that we make within the legislature is set to focus on the next 10 to 20 years of the legislature, or next 10 to 20 years of the state's viability. So with that said, the governor had a program that he thought was his marquee program, CT Next. That program is essentially defunct now, had been bonded, allocated $65 million in bonding. That money never got to CT Next. I met with a lot of the fellows in CT Next. I think that it was a phenomenal program. A bunch of us here, my colleagues and myself, are rather concerned around what happens next. So there are 12 layoffs, obviously, within that program. And I think, Commissioner, you've said that you want to turn it into the Office of Innovation. I'd like for you just to provide any insights to the committee as to how you'll transition this from CT Next into the Office of Innovation and what that impact will be with existing programs. That's my first question.
Sure. And one point of clarification, you just described it as defunct. I would say defunded. It's actually what I'm working to do is make sure it doesn't become
I stand
defunct.
corrected, and rightfully so. Thank you, sir.
So you described it correctly, though. This is, look, this is going to sound disassociated, which is, we as administration, and, also, by the way, in my role as Chief Innovation Officer for the state, the work of CT Next, we value and think is important. But it was funded through bonding. That was the way the program was set up, and that was the mechanism through which it had historically been funded. As I've said publicly, this administration doesn't necessarily always view bonding as the appropriate funding mechanism for programming and overhead, which is what CT Next does. It hasn't received bond funding in almost 3 years now. And so if you take those two disassociated elements, it's work that we would like to see sustain and continue, but the funding mechanism is not necessarily effective. What do you do? And so what we're working on is bringing that work into the DECD, where it can be funded on a sustained basis. Not this year. The budget is, as you know, we're in a tightening cycle. The budget is the budget, but going forward, we would like to have a conversation around an appropriation at the appropriate time. In the meantime, we need to work with the legislature. So it is a legislatively prescribed program. So it isn't up to me, actually. I would like to work with you all to get it fixed, to make sure it can sustain, but there's going to be a process associated with that and making sure that we can bring those over to sustain the work to the extent they want to, and bring funding over to fund that work. And that's just a process we have to work through.
I appreciate that, Commissioner, and I appreciate you sharing and believing that we should be involved in that process, because I think that we all care very deeply about this. And I will also say we care about it simply because everything goes to DECD, as the good chairwoman earlier said. So just a question, and I think it's an off the cuff question, but it's still related to the budget as we move forward to the next biennium budget. Do you have an idea, a guesstimate around how much it will cost for this program in the Office of Innovation to now
So first of all, let me
run? So I don't know if it's going to be $65 million as it was in bonding. It may be less because you have a larger staff already, but just walk us through that process so that we know what to expect.
Yeah, and by the way, one thing I need to say and should have said in a public forum is all existing CT Next commitments will be met. I want to make sure the market very much knows that to be the case. To your question, I don't have a guesstimate. We need to work through that. The previous bonding was 67.5. Current bonding, as you said, was 65. And each of those was over 5 years. You know, we have within the DECD, we have shared services. So we don't necessarily need to fund back office. So while I don't have a guesstimate, and if it's okay, I don't want to commit to it now, because I really do want to work through the work of being thoughtful around that.
Absolutely.
We won't have it asked for another 12 months. But I will tell you, it won't necessarily need to be as much. Now, what that means, though, is we could allocate more dollars towards the good work, right? We don't necessarily have to allocate it towards overhead, or at least shared services overhead. So that could mean if we decide to allocate the same or more, it could go towards the programs itself. But I will defer, if it's okay, on any specificity until we've been able to do the work.
Absolutely. And I think that that is something certainly that we can work on within the working groups, and something that we like to have in writing, because it's never too early to start thinking about the next biennium period. So thank you for your answer, Madam Chair. Back to you.
So because we are down to 13 minutes, I'm going to ask the next few people to give a list of things to come to the working group. My thing to come to the working group, Kelly, is the ARPA dollars is $70 million. What has been allocated of the money that's been allocated? What has been spent? No, but I don't have time right now because we only have 13 minutes. And Madam Administrator will string me up if I don't start the committee meeting on time. So I apologize to that. Representative Walker, do you have some things for listed?
And just to let you know, Kelly, I was going to ask that same thing, but she jumped in front of me so that I couldn't have the conversation. But anyhow, I just want you to know, I'd like to know what we've done, especially with the three main things that we had talked about, which was teaching, CNA or nursing, and childcare. Those are the things and what programs you've established in that. And there was there was one other program that you had. We'd like to know with the work with the regional workforce boards, what you've been doing with them too, so that we can get a good understanding of what we are doing. Oh, that's good. So all of those things, and let's have a good conversation. Okay, thank you.
Senator Hartley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on my punch list, yeah, I'd like to talk about the Job CT program. I'm getting a lot of response that folks say, you know, we're small business, but we're never going to make the 25 higher level for new employees. And the only other recourse we have is then a loan program. And so they feel like they're just out there. And yeah, give me a summary of the boost. Let's see the numbers. Let's see the profile. Are we hitting the targets that we wanted to? Yes. And so now we've got this Office of Innovation, which is going to be the new, I guess, CT Next. It's going to be called Office of Innovation. Is that what you're contemplating?
If I can respond quickly, that's one potential concept,
Oh.
which is just leveraging the Office of Manufacturing as its analogy. which-
Commissioner, I'm sorry.
Please.
I just want her to give the
Yeah.
list of things
Fair
because I'm
enough.
not going to have time to finish everybody.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, we
I'm going to turn off my mic.
I need to understand that. And then on the federal initiatives, so I mean, we've got some really landmark opportunities here nationally with the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act. I want to know where Connecticut is weighing in on that. You know, what benefit is going to be brought home here. And then lastly, we've got a line item in here that and it's not a lot, it's $150K that we give to the travelers. And that event then, you know, brings in small businesses to, you know, I guess, do their thing there. And I'm hearing that they charge an exponential fee for our Connecticut small businesses to be in there to participate. It's kind of a contradiction in terms. It makes me want to go back and look at that number. Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Senator Winfield?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just really, really quickly, the $3.2 and $7.6 million that are in OE, can you just detail for us what that is going towards in social equity? I'm referring to social equity. And then the $4.4 million in funding. Can you help us understand what that money is doing and how all of that, both sets of monies, how they help with the issue of social equity? Thanks.
And because none of us got to ask all our questions, I'd like to have an update on the tourism and statewide marketing, what we're doing with that, what we're doing for the theaters long term, how we're handling all of the arts councils. So I'd like to get all of the what I would call CT Humanities, Arts, Theater, statewide marketing, an update on all of that. Does anybody have anything else they would like to add to the list? Senator Hartley?
Yeah, mea culpa. I don't want anybody to feel looked over. And so we would like to have some kind of a summary from our Chief Manufacturing Officer as to all the great things that we have been doing and maybe the things that we need to aspire to. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Representative Walker?
She's rushing us. But on the Social Equity Council, I'd like to understand what how your budget is established. In other words, how do we make the determination of the amount of money that goes into your account for spending? I'd like to know if that's a formula-driven issue or is that arbitrary? So that would be my other question. Thank you.
Does anybody have anything else they want to add to the list?
Yes, Madam.
Jerry?
I would like to add the language and any other items which the legislators deem necessary.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner, thank you very much for coming today. Next time, plan on having a couple of hours because I think people have some long-term questions. And Kelly, I know a lot of people wanted to have a longer conversation with you, but I think we'll set that up at another time, okay?
Happy to do it. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, everybody. The public hearing with the agencies is now closed. We have 7 minutes until we have our committee meeting. So all of you can get ready for that.